My name is Mark, a recording angel. I've been observing this earth since the dawn of creation. The Most High has asked me to share my recordings with you. The following are my records of Old Testament prophets and kings, and scheming scoundrels too, collected in this book, Exile of the Chosen, God's Heroes from Solomon to Malachi. If today's recording contains situations which might be uncomfortable for younger listeners, I will mark the video with the words Parental Guidance Recommended.
Chapter 3, Part 2, Jedediah. "Obadiah!" the two boys heard the king shout as they entered the throne room. "I'm right here, my lord." "Oh, I didn't see you. The people are getting restless. They're going to rebel soon if we don't do something. There isn't enough food to feed the people here in Samaria. I think we need to search the surrounding region. Perhaps we'll find some grass so that we could at least feed our horses and won't have to kill them." Ahaziah and Jedediah glanced at each other. This sounded interesting. "I think we should ride out of the city, and then one of us go in a northerly direction and the other head south," Ahab suggested. "If we find some grazing land, we'll send messengers back and bring some of our livestock to that area. Who knows, perhaps we will find a few farmers we can raid." "Can we go?" Ahaziah asked. "It will allow me to see you conducting royal duties. Please say yes." The king glanced at the two boys. They stood as tall as they could. "It could be dangerous," he reminded them. "But, Father, you're going. If you have enough bodyguards with you to protect you, there should be enough to protect us, too. Let us come." Ahab smiled. "Okay, but I need you to be quiet and stay out of the way. And if anything happens, I want you to stay in the center so the soldiers can defend you." "Yes," Ahaziah said excitedly. "Don't worry, we will." The search party rode out of the city until they reached the crossroads. "Break into two groups," Ahab ordered. "One goes north with me. The other rides with Obadiah." "Can we go with Obadiah?" Ahaziah asked. The king frowned. "I thought the reason you came along was to learn royal duties." "Yes, that's why we came. I'll ride with you, Father. Jedediah can accompany his father. Maybe he'll learn something that will help him serve me when I'm king." Ahab stared at his son for a moment. "I'm hoping it won't be for some time, Ahaziah," he said finally. "Oh, of course. I wouldn't want to be king for many, many years." His father continued to frown. Ahaziah rode over next to him. Jedediah joined Obadiah. He was glad his father had taught him to keep silent whenever possible. Sometimes Ahaziah would be better off if he learned that too. Jedediah and his father had ridden for over an hour, when suddenly Obadiah reined to a stop. "There's no point in all of us trampling along like a camel train," he said. "Since none of us are royalty, it's not as dangerous anyway. So I'd like to break us up into 4 groups and spread out. We're more likely to find some grazing land that way." "But we're here to protect you," one of the soldiers protested. "Yes, I know, but I don't need this much protection." The soldier reluctantly agreed. The people seemed to direct most of their anger at the king himself. Obadiah faced more anger from the king's wrath for not being able to provide for the needs of Samaria and the palace than he did from the hostility of the people. "You're right, my lord," the soldier said at last, and he turned to give orders to his men. "We will meet back here an hour before sunset," Obadiah announced. Then he and his son rode off together. It seemed as if they had been traveling forever, when again Obadiah halted. "What is it?" Jedediah asked. Obadiah nodded to his left. The boy saw a man approaching them. When he reached them, the stranger threw back his hood. Father had already dismounted and was walking toward him. Now he knelt and touched his forehead to the ground. "My master, Elijah," he said. "Is it really you?" Jedediah's chin dropped. Quickly he slipped from his horse and hurried over to his father. "Yes," the prophet replied. "I want you to tell your master Ahab that I'm here." "Why?" Obadiah demanded. "Why are you doing this to me?" The prophet raised an eyebrow. "You're handing me over to Ahab to be put to death. You know full well that the king has sent spies to look for you everywhere. There isn't a nation or kingdom anywhere in the world where he hasn't sent someone to search for you. Anyone who claimed you weren't there had to take an oath saying they couldn't find you. I'm telling you the truth, as certainly as the Lord our God is alive. Now you tell me to go say this to Ahab. The Spirit of the Lord will rescue you and carry you away when I leave you. He protects you. Then I won't know where you are. And if I tell Ahab this and he doesn't find you, he'll kill me. Please don't do this. I have worshipped the Lord ever since I was young. I've even taught my sons in secret to worship the Lord." Jedediah nodded to confirm what his father said. "My master Elijah, haven't you heard of the things that I've done for the Lord? Jezebel has been killing the Lord's prophets, but I hid 100 of them in 2 caves. I've had 50 in each cave and supplied them with food and water all this time. Why are you sending me back to Ahab like this? You know I'll be killed." "Stop, stop," the prophet interrupted. "I serve the Lord who rules over all. You can be sure that he lives, and you can be just as sure that I promise to stay right here. I'll speak to King Ahab today. Your life is safe. Go fetch the king." Obadiah returned to Jedediah. "Let's go," he said. Jedediah broke into a huge grin and waved to Elijah as they left. He could have sworn he saw a twinkle in the prophet's eye as the man waved back. It was late in the afternoon when they caught up with the king. Hot, tired, and grumpy, he and his men had found nothing useful. "Obadiah!" Ahab shouted. "Why are you back already? Did you find something good? Shall I bring the horses?" "I did find something good, Your Majesty." "Was it water? Grass?" "No, Your Majesty." "Then what are you doing back here?" the king exploded. "Get out of my sight! Whatever you found, if it wasn't farm crops or water or grass, I don't care. Get out of my sight." "Your Majesty," Obadiah said calmly, "I found the prophet Elijah." Ahab stared at Obadiah, then said, "Take me to him." Jedediah noticed his father becoming more and more apprehensive the closer they got to the meeting place. Would Elijah still be there? He had said that he would. But surely the God of Israel valued him as a prophet and wouldn't just leave him there. As they rounded the last bend in the pathway, they saw the prophet there, just as he had promised. "You're the man who's been such a troublemaker," Ahab growled. "You've brought misery to the whole country." "No," Elijah replied calmly. "You're the one who has caused so much trouble, and you've brought misery to the whole country by worshipping the god Baal. The god of heaven shut up the windows of heaven and gave you no rain for 3 years. That should prove to you that Baal is not the god of rain." "And so we're having a drought," the king argued. "Let's see your God put an end to it if he can." "He can. Send for people from all over Israel. Tell them to meet me on Mount Carmel. And bring the 458 prophets of the god Baal, and also the 400 prophets of the goddess Asherah, all those who eat at your wife Jezebel's table." "I will," the king declared. "We'll have a showdown at Carmel. When we're done, we'll kill you and throw your body to the ravens." Elijah just stood there. "We'll meet again, soon." As they headed back toward the city of Samaria, Obadiah dropped back from Ahab's side and rode next to Jedediah. His son looked around carefully to make sure no one else was within earshot. "Father," he whispered, "have you heard the rumors about the things Elijah has been doing?" "That depends," Obadiah answered carefully. "Which rumors?" "Well, I heard that he's been staying with a widow near Zarephath, and that as long as he remained with her, none of her food ran out. The person I talked to said that they'd been told that her oil jar had more oil in it every day when she went to look, and the same with her flour jar." Obadiah laughed. "I heard that one too." "How could that be true? Do you really believe it?" The boy's father glanced around carefully, then lowered his voice. "I do. The whole point of this drought is for God to prove that he's more powerful than Baal. What would be greater than for him to demonstrate that he was able to provide even for Baal's own people in Baal's own territory, such as Zarephath, especially during a time like this when Baal is not acting as god of rain and fertility. People in that town have been starving to death." Jedediah nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. There's so many stories. I even heard that the widow's only son died and that Elijah raised him back to life." "The God of Israel certainly has a sense of humor," Obadiah chuckled. "What's funny about that?" "Think about it. I'm sure that when her son died, everyone in the village and everyone who had heard about what was going on would have concluded that Baal struck her son dead because she was harboring the prophet Elijah. What better way for the God of Israel to show that he was more powerful than Baal than to overrule the storm god's revenge and bring the child back to life? Oh! Suddenly Jedediah had a strange feeling in the pit of his stomach. Then you believe it's true? Right now, there are so many stories circulating. Some of them are just ridiculous. These do sound like something the God of Israel would do, but I suppose we won't know for sure until this conflict is over, and people are less afraid to talk about what really happened. Yet I know that our God is able to do such things. And the more the priests of Baal think about it, the more angry they're going to be. Baal really isn't holding up his end for them at all. No, Baal hasn't done a thing for anyone for 3 years. I have a hunch we're going to see more action from the God of Elijah and the God of Israel before this is over, his father concluded. I think great things are afoot. I can't wait to see what he does, Jedediah replied. I'm hot, Prince Ahaziah whispered to Jedediah. We've been standing out here all day. Both boys were dripping with perspiration, but not as badly as the dancing priests in front of them. I don't see how Elijah is going to be able to be any more successful than these guys, Ahaziah continued. They've been summoning Baal all day and nothing has happened. Now they're cutting themselves and soaking the ground with their blood. If that doesn't bring Lord Baal, nothing will. The mourning dance, Jedediah murmured. Yes, mourning the death of Baal will usually bring about his rebirth and get him active again. What's the matter? Elijah taunted the priest. Yell louder. Maybe he can't hear you. Perhaps he's on vacation or in the bathroom. The priest glared at the prophet. Jezebel stomped over to her palanquin and climbed inside. No, you don't, Ahab hissed to her. This whole charade is because of you. You need to stay here till it's over. Puts us in enough of a bad light without you leaving. Furiously, Jezebel yanked the curtains closed, but remained. This is getting embarrassing, Ahaziah mumbled to his friend Jedediah. I wish they'd just give up. Elijah isn't going to be able to do anything that they haven't been able to do either. They could at least quit and call it a draw. Jedediah agreed absent-mindedly. He wondered whether the God of Israel wouldn't startle the king, the prophets of Baal, and all the people assembled there with another show of his power over Baal. He secretly hoped it would happen. Yet Elijah looked so, ordinary compared to the priests of Baal. And there was only one of him in contrast to the 400 priests. Finally, the Baal priest dropped to the dusty ground from sheer exhaustion. Ahaziah let out a sigh. Ahab motioned for Elijah to begin. You can come closer, the prophet told everyone. The boys and everyone else crowded to where they could see what Elijah was doing. The priests of Baal crept closer, wanting to make sure that he didn't hide any fire under his sacrifice or pull any other tricks. I smiled to myself. They were certainly disappointed that Baal had not answered them, but a show of power is what they had asked for, and it was what they would be getting. The guardians had all of the satanic forces at bay, not even allowing them to set foot on the mountain. The people wanted to know who was the strongest. They were about to find out. Elijah took 12 stones, one for each tribe, and built an altar. It was on a spot that had once contained an altar to God a long time ago, but it had not been repaired for ages. Then the prophet dug a trencher on the altar. After stacking the firewood, he cut the sacrificial bull in pieces and laid it on top of the fuel. Fill the 4 barrels with water, he instructed the servants, and pour it on the sacrifice and on the wood. Where are they going to find 4 barrels of water? Ahaziah asked his father. Water's hard to come by these days. After all, that's why we're here. We're not that far from the coast, Ahab replied. I'm sure the prophet won't require it to be drinkable water. Sure enough, the servants eventually returned and dumped the water on the sacrifice. Do it again, the prophet ordered. A murmur rippled through the crowd. How does he expect to burn the sacrifice when he's soaking it? Someone inquired. No one knew. After the servants splashed the second batch on the altar, Elijah shouted, Do it one more time! And they did. The sacrifice and the firewood were soaked. Water ran down the altar and filled the trench around it. Elijah's altar was one huge puddle. No doubt existed in anyone's mind now. It would require a miracle for the soggy sacrifice to burn. Then the prophet prayed. Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he cried in a loud voice. "Let everyone know today that you are the God of Israel, and that I am your servant, and I have done all these things because you told me to. Please hear me, God, that these people may know that you are the Lord, and that you have turned your heart back toward them again." As he finished, with a deafening crack, lightning struck the altar. Everyone fell back from the heat. The fire burned the soggy sacrifice and every splinter of the wood. After licking up the water in the trench, it vaporized the altar stones and the dirt around it. All that remained was a smoking pit. Terrified, the people fell on their faces. A chant started through the crowd. "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" The prophets of Baal turned pale. Jezebel and her bodyguards had disappeared into the crowd. "Get the prophets!" Elijah exclaimed. "Don't let even one of them escape." "What are they going to do?" Jedediah asked. "Execute them, I think," his father replied. The mob grabbed the prophets of Baal and dragged them down by the brook. They would do anything to avoid offending the God that had just sent fire from heaven. When Elijah returned, he and many of the people in the crowd were covered in blood, and none of the prophets of Baal were with them. "Get up, your majesty," Elijah commanded. "Have some supper and get home, for there's going to be a lot of rain." Everyone looked around. Rain? Rain? What a wonderful thing! No rain had fallen for 3 years. Shading their eyes from the sun, they scanned the sky. It was completely cloudless. However, Ahab did as told. The servants put a meal before him, while the prophet went up the mountain to pray alone. Ahaziah cleared his throat and finally spoke. "Amazing! He brought down fire and burned even rock. Do you think he can make it rain?" "I don't think it's him," Jedediah replied. "I believe it's the God of Israel doing it." Ahab's son shrugged. "Do you think it will rain?" "Yes, I believe it will." Once more Ahaziah scanned the sky. "Well, it's going to have to rain out of a clear sky," he said, "because there isn't a cloud anywhere." "Do what Elijah said and eat your dinner," Jedediah laughed, "or you're going to be heading home in the rain on an empty stomach." "I doubt it," Ahaziah mumbled as he turned to the food the servants had set before him. Just as they finished the evening meal, the prophet's servant hurried down the mountainside. "Look," he said, "there's a little cloud out there toward the city." The boys stared at a cloud so tiny that if they put a hand up at arm's length, it completely covered it. "Get in your chariots and head back for the palace, or you're going to be caught in a downpour," the prophet commanded Ahab. The crowd stared at the tiny cloud. Some started moving down the slope toward home. Others just stood around watching. Jedediah swallowed his last bite and ran over to where the chariots were. "Come on, Ahaziah," he said. "It'd be nice to get home before the rain starts." They waited in their chariots until the king mounted his and rode ahead of them toward Jezreel. Elijah tucked up his robe into his belt and raced ahead of the chariot. "How can he run after being here all day?" Ahaziah commented. "I don't know," Jedediah answered. "Perhaps the Lord who sent the fire kept a little for Elijah." The boys laughed, and then their chariot took off for the palace. They staggered into the palace in Jezreel soaking wet, having been barely able to complete the journey because of the deep mud and rushing water. "Mother would be furious," Ahaziah said, shivering from the cold rain. "I sure wouldn't want to be the king right now. He stood by and did nothing to protect the prophets of Baal." "What else could he do?" Jedediah countered. "The Lord had just brought fire down from heaven. He had to either accept him as the winner of the power struggle or defy him. And who would do that? No king in his right mind. I don't know which would be worse, to deal with the wrath of the God of Israel or that of my mother." "She may be angry," Jedediah said, "but I think your father made the right decision. The God of Israel won that one fair and square." Ahaziah nodded. "Yes, I have to agree with you. The God of Israel is truly amazing."
This broadcast has come from the book Exile of the Chosen by Sally Pierson Dillon, with permission from the Review and Herald Publishing Association. This book and the rest of the series, War of the Ages, can be purchased by going to www.adventistbookcenter.com or by calling 1-800-765-6955. I'm your narrator, Austin Backus, and this audio project is a gift to you from my free Christian book ministry, RXF 1888. Please visit our website, www.rxf1888.com, to request free Christian books for both kids and adults. And join us here again for more stories from Mark the Recording Angel.